When you meet someone new, you almost immediately start looking for common ground. You ask where they're from, what they do for a living, or who they know. This is a survival instinct. Every bit of shared information acts as a data point that decreases your internal anxiety. To see why, we can look at this animated diagram of the brain's neural circuitry. When you encounter a broken pattern or an unpredictable situation, the brain registers it as a threat. The neural pathways light up with distress signals. But once you gather enough information to establish a predictable pattern, the circuitry settles down into a calm state. Your daily habits and rigid routines serve a vital physiological purpose. The brain demands predictability because knowing what comes next has kept our species safe from unknown dangers for thousands of years. We are biologically hardwired to crave certainty, and if an adversary knows how to exploit it, that craving becomes a massive vulnerability. So, what happens when someone recognizes your deep need for structure and intentionally refuses to provide it? In his book, The 48 Laws of Power, Robert Greene details how to weaponize this exact dynamic. Law 17 instructs leaders to cultivate an air of unpredictability, deliberately keeping targets in a state of suspended terror. The tactic works by attacking the brain's processing power. An opponent faced with completely random behavior will spend all of their cognitive energy trying to decode your motives and predict your next move, rather than actually building a strategy to defeat you. By simply withholding a predictable pattern, a leader flips the power dynamic. They paralyze their opponent with their own biological panic, winning the conflict before a single physical blow is exchanged. We can see this psychological warfare at play as far back as the Renaissance. The political theorist Niccolò Machiavelli observed that a ruler could control their subjects through the manipulation of signs and theatrical gestures, rather than exhausting their military with brute force. Machiavelli highlighted the actions of Cesare Borgia to prove his point. Borgia wanted to command total compliance in a newly conquered region, so he took one of his own ministers, cut him in half, and left the body in a public piazza. It was a gruesome spectacle that left the population both satisfied and utterly stupefied. They obeyed him out of sheer bewilderment. Fast forward to the Cold War, and you see the same principle applied to global superpowers. U.S. President Richard Nixon explicitly adopted what he called the madman theory as a cornerstone of his foreign policy. Nixon wanted the Soviet Union and North Vietnam to believe he was volatile and completely irrational. If the enemy thinks you might press the nuclear button over a minor disagreement, they will negotiate against themselves to avoid a catastrophic response. Feigning madness is a highly cost-effective strategy. You lock an adversary in a state of continuous hesitation without having to fire a shot. You don't have to be a head of state pretending to be unhinged to use this tactic. Entire military institutions use it to deliberately scramble adversary decision-making. Researchers at the Rand Corporation evaluated several methods for the U.S. military to project operational unpredictability. They recommended bluffing about multi-domain capabilities, deploying forces in highly irregular patterns, and repeatedly revealing covert technology just to keep rivals off balance. As this animated map illustrates, these tactics force the enemy to spread their defensive resources thin. Because they cannot predict the exact angle of attack, they have to stretch their forces to cover every conceivable vector, causing their defensive posture to fracture. In kinetic combat, this macro strategy translates into military strategist John Boyd's OODA loop, the cycle of observe, orient, decide, and act. To win, you have to operate your loop faster than your opponent. Boyd accomplished this by executing what he called fast transients. These are abrupt, disorienting maneuvers designed to constantly reset the enemy's loop. By the time they orient to your last move, you are already executing the next one, trapping them forever in the observe phase. By overwhelming the opponent's cognitive load with continuous, unpredictable inputs, you render their physical weapons useless. When we feel threatened, our biological instinct is to retreat to the familiar. Law 18 warns that building a rigid fortress only cuts you off from information and turns you into a static, vulnerable target. The ancient strategist Sun Tzu recognized the greatest military power has no constant shape. He argued that to achieve victory, an army must operate exactly like water. Water doesn't attack the strongest point of an obstacle. It effortlessly flows away from heavily fortified areas, finds the path of least resistance, and crashes heavily into the exposed weaknesses to build unstoppable momentum. For this fluid strategy to be truly demoralizing, it must appear unforced. If an opponent sees you working to adapt, they see a logic they can eventually counter. But when your dominance looks completely effortless, it takes on the inexplicable, awe-inspiring quality of a natural wonder. This is the goal of Spread Satora, using artful grace to hide your labor, ensuring your opponent sees your victory as an inevitability rather than a calculation. Mastering your own cognitive dissonance while keeping your opponent trapped in theirs creates a total psychological advantage. It bypasses physical defenses to attack their very biology. At this level of formlessness, the act of resisting you is as futile as trying to punch the ocean.